I've played a lot of games in my life over a massive amount of systems. I've booted up BASIC, slammed in cartridges, discs, and cassette tapes, and played games I never thought I would during my career on Twitch and YouTube. But what were the first games I ever played? What were the first memories I had in front of a CRT or in some cases a VGA monitor? And that's the topic of today's episode, suggested by Kevin Van Zost 3212. I'm having to go far back and I might make an error or two, or 12 or 25, but I'm going to make a conscious decision to put you in my shoes for my journey in our favorite pastime. Let's begin. My early life is blurry, as it is for most of us. We don't have sentient memories, that's just physiologically how we are as kids. But one interesting thing about our memories is that in some cases, we can vividly remember oddly specific things, and for me, it was a Genesis that my dad owned. Now at the time, I was a gremlin. I'm actually about to release a video to celebrate our 8,000 subscriber milestone talking about my retro gaming journey, and in that episode, I cover how one Christmas morning, I decided to use the handle of a water gun to break every single ornament on the Christmas tree that I could reach. My dad was angry, and as he stomped towards me, he stepped on a hook, and it drove it about 3 inches into his heel. I was grounded for a little bit, but I remember watching from the top of the stairs. My dad was playing a fighting game. He was kicking ass. And I remembered that he saw me, right? And he gestured for me to come down. I don't remember what he said, but he plopped down the controller in my lap and got up and went to his computer. Now, I was horrible at Mortal Kombat. That game kicked my ass more than my dad wanted to tear my ass up for the destruction. But that's my earliest gaming memory, and it's something that I treasure. I would push a button and a guy would punch. I could kick, I could move around. To a kid, this was epic. I hadn't seen it before, and little did I know, it would pave the way for a long interest in video gaming. If you told me as a kid that we would have Mortal Kombat 1 in 2023, I probably would have just stared at you. Probably shit myself too. I remember my dad taking me to see The Lion King. It was a play or something, nothing special. I think it was something his nephew was in, and of course, I didn't care. I was part of the ADHD generation, so once it was over, I was more than ready to leave. People in lion outfits really didn't do it for me. I was bored, so bored. But we stopped by Pizza Hut, and for anyone who remembers Pizza Huts in the 90s, they were the shit, and in some ways they still look exactly the same. But I feel the cultural relevance of Pizza Hut, it's not there anymore. You could walk in, you'd see the shitty brick-looking floor that transitioned to the carpet that was stained to high heavens, a menagerie of different pizzas on the buffet line, and in the corner there was always an arcade. But we barely made any money as a family, and I didn't really want to ask to play anything. Dad walked to the Galaga machine and he put a coin in, because this was the era where 25 cents actually meant you played a full game. And when he was done kicking the shit out of it, I asked if I could play. To my surprise, he said yes. Here's the issue, I was short. For most of my life, I was short. In fact, I was 4'8" all the way up until my 9th grade year, when I randomly shot up to 5'8", and I've remained there. But as a kid, there was no way I was tall enough to see the controls, much less play the game. Usually there were stools, but there weren't any near us. Dad decided to hold me up, and he let me play as long as I want. I went through at least $3 in quarters. Now, my dad was injured as a kid in his early 20s. He fell off of a bridge and broke every damn bone in his body. He was a walking fusion of hardware and resilience, so him holding me up, you could tell that it was hurting him. But that didn't make him stop. I told this story before in my 10 Greatest Gaming Memories episode, and if you want a feel-good episode about moments in my life, you should check that one out. The game was Galaga though, and it was one I played quite often in my life, and when I missed my dad, I put it in MAME. It brings me back to a time that I wish I could return to. Growing up, my dad had a computer, but I wasn't allowed on it. My grandparents, however, they were more than willing to let me get on the computer and play games. Now, when they bought their Windows 98 machine, they were able to get a few different pieces of software for free. They chose Microsoft Encarta, MechWarrior 2 31st Century Combat, and Torrens Passage. There was something so special about the first time I booted up Torrens Passage, and I think it was tied to just how epic the opening of most Sierra games of the era were. You would hear this orchestral wind-up, then the mountain would show up, and from that point on, at least in the 90s, you knew that you were in good hands. Torrens Passage was created by Al Lowe, who I actually talked to last year as part of the Legends series, which was awesome, and in some ways, I was able to nerd out. It was my fanboy experience. But it took me a long time to beat it. I was still at the age where deduction was not my strong suit, but to me in a point-and-click environment, the game was everything I wanted. If I made a stupid choice, there were consequences for it. If I made the right choice, I was praised. The flow of Torrens Passage from a design standpoint was absolutely wonderful, and that hint system, it came in clutch more times than I'm comfortable admitting. If there ever was a point-and-click game that I would suggest to you to play right now, it would be Torrens Passage. It's one of my favorites for a reason. The other game my grandparents would get would be MechWarrior 2 31st Century Combat. Now, when I was younger, I had no clue how to play this. I knew that I could walk forward, and because I had the attention span of a spinning top, I didn't bother reading the manual. So my grandmother threw it away. This was long before internet was affordable. I don't even think we had dial-up, or if we did, it wasn't something that I remember. Even when my grandfather was grading papers and went from a floppy disk to another floppy disk back and forth, I don't even think they had internet. So learning the controls of this game involved pushing every single button and figuring out what it did. Most of the time when I played this, I would inadvertently overheat my MechWarrior, or I would just shut down the fucking thing and get lambasted by the enemies. Going back now, the graphics weren't the best, but who cares? Not me. This was epic when it came out, and I can see why. It was a genuinely fun mech combat simulator, and you know, now that I think about it, I wonder if there was a HOTAS setup back then that may have made it even more fun. Do you remember? Feel free to comment down below if you do. I read every single comment, and I do respond to every single comment, even the mean ones. My first true system that I owned was a Nintendo 64 because at the time, I didn't consider handheld consoles practical. So when my dad bought me a Game Boy Pocket, I was kind of confused. The games were in black and white. I couldn't play at night, couldn't play on long road trips, and we couldn't afford batteries, so majority of the time I spent playing Tetris was at my grandmother's house because she always had tons of batteries. I don't know why, but it was something she always had. Interestingly enough, this is a memory that was spawned recently by having my grandmother stream Tetris with me. Apparently one day I let her try her hand at it and she was addicted. We ended up going to Office Depot to nab some paper for the printer, and she saw Tetris Classic on the bargain bin, and she asked if that was the game that I played, and I said, yeah. And from that point on, my grandmother was hooked on Tetris. She played the shit out of it. What you see when you check out my stream now is just a smidge of the ability she had whenever I was younger. Long before she had carpal tunnel syndrome and arthritis, she would actively get to level 10 on that, and it was boggling to me. As a game though, if we look at the older Tetris iterations, this is hands down one of my favorites. And I'm kind of sad that I lost the game to time, because it would be interesting to check it out again, maybe on the Analog Pocket, and let my grandmother experience where it all started before. You know what? I might actually do that. When I was in kindergarten, Dad bought a Nintendo Entertainment System. I don't remember where, I don't remember when, and I can't really ask him because he passed away a few years ago. My mom and I don't really talk that much, and I doubt she would even care because they were divorced. But I remember sitting down on the couch after school, watching my dad annihilate Super Mario Bros., and I remember asking him, why are you so good at it? And he told me that when he had his accident, he was bedridden for a while. His friends from work brought him a NES with Super Mario Bros., and for the 6 months that he was inpatient, he would just play the fuck out of it over and over and over again. And it's funny too, because throughout my life, we would always challenge each other to play it. I remember when I was much older and I had my Wii, one of the first things I spent money on was buying the virtual console entry for Super Mario Bros. And playing that with him. And to my knowledge, when I made a Raspberry Pi build for him, the first game he played was Super Mario Bros. And I like to think it was because it took him back to when life was just a little bit easier to live before cancer really was an issue. I'm glad that he had the chance to remember that game. I know it was important to him. Now, the version we had was the Duck Hunt version, so the 2-in-1 cartridge, so we'd always take turns shooting ducks and clay pigeons. I liked the ducks, Dad liked the clay pigeons. We would always play until wrestling came on, and then I was banned from the living room when that happened because Mom didn't like me watching wrestling. Again, back in kindergarten, most of the software I had for my Game Boy Pocket was from my dad. He would go grocery shopping, and if he saw a deal for some stupidly cheap low-budget game, he would bring it home to me. And the first was Nintendo World Cup. Now, this is a soccer game through and through, but it's a spicy soccer game because it's part of the Kunio-kun line of games, think River City Ransom. So not only are we playing soccer, we're also kicking the shit out of literally everyone on the field. I spent so many hours trying to beat this game, and I think as an adult I could probably swing it. I remember making it to the USSR or France level because every country is different, be it field conditions or strength of the characters, but damn was this game addicting. I think I still have my original copy too. Might be worth it to check it out sometime. Another game that he brought home was a compilation of Game & Watch games reimagined for the Game Boy. Nowadays, we all know Game & Watch. We know Mr. Game & Watch from Super Smash Bros. Maybe we've even played games that stemmed from those original Game & Watch titles. But as a kid, I had no fucking clue what Game & Watch was, so I thought it was a stupid name. What the hell is Game & Watch and how is there a gallery? Turns out it's a compilation of 4 different shitty games from the 80s that work like LCD games because they were dedicated handhelds. But what piqued my interest was the reimagining. I loved Manhole, Octopus, and Fireman, but I wasn't big on Oil Panic. That game was kinda shit. But the others were games that let you get into a rhythm, and that was addicting. Did you know that they made 4 of these? I learned that a few years ago, and low-key I want to check them all out at some point because those games were excellent time wasters. Christmas of 1998 was epic, absolutely epic, because it was the one Christmas where I got everything that I wanted. New headphones, new shoes, shirts, toys, action figures, and more importantly, my very own Nintendo 64, of which had a few games that my grandparents and parents pitched in for. Banjo-Kazooie, I believe Twisted Edge and Extreme G may have been included, but the one that mattered was Super Mario 64. For a long time, the only Mario I knew was this small little guy that would shrink or get bigger depending on if he ate a mushroom. And now I have this grown-ass adult Mario going around and doing things I had only dreamed about in gaming when it came to physically controlling a character. Mario had personality, the worlds had depth, and while I fucking abhor the game now as an adult because of the camera, this was the shit back then. Since then, I've played it over and over again. My kids have played it. I've played ROM hacks. I've even seen my friends abuse the hell out of the programming because they're speedrunners. But that Christmas, that was a good one. While I would check out the rest of the games I owned, including a surprise pop-up of Ocarina of Time after we took down the Christmas tree, there's one more game that I felt was significantly more important to my childhood that came a few years later. So let's talk about that. When my grandmother upgraded her computer, the first thing I did was run to it, click on Start, go to Accessories and Games to see what was included. This was before Wild Tangent would put their bloatware on your computer, so all we had was Minesweeper, Free Cell Solitaire, and more importantly, 3D Space Cadet, which for the most part was the only pinball game I ever gave a shit about. Basically, you would sit there, play pinball, go down the chutes, get extra balls, score tons of points, and then put your bragging rights on the pop-up once the game ended if you were on the scoreboard. I would compete all the time against my grandmother. It was fun. But did you know that 3D Space Cadet is one of 3 different boards? The version we played was licensed to Microsoft for inclusion in Windows 95 and others moving forward, but we never knew about it. Me and my grandmother didn't bother exploring the software that came with the computer natively, so we were kind of surprised once we booted up the Windows Millennium Edition and found 3D Space Cadet. But the game that 3D Space Cadet is from is actually known as Full Tilt Pinball, and if you do manage to download or snag a copy of it, you'll see 2 more tables, Skullduggery and Dragon's Keep. It really depends on what theme you wanted to mess around with. outer space, pirates, or dragons of legend. And that's it for today's episode. What did you think of this list? Do you remember the first games that you ever played? I would absolutely love to hear about it down in the comments section below, and I know our community would as well. This is a great opportunity to plant our roots in our gaming identity, and if you made it to the end of this episode, you're already home in our community. We're a group of gaming enthusiasts that love remembering a time when life was just a little bit easier to live, and if you align with that, you'll fit right in, so feel free to click that subscribe button. Finally, the single most important thing you can do for me is to hit that thumbs up button, as it directly aligns with the visibility of the projects and the videos that I work on every single day. As always, from my family to your family, good energy, good vibes. Fortefyre out.